Ever notice how a new drug or medical device just sort of appears? Like one day it's
Uh,
not there, and the next it's changing lives.
Yeah, it can feel like magic.
But there's this whole journey that happens before that. It's not magic. It's actually a ton of testing and some very strict rules.
Right, absolutely.
That's what we're diving into today. Clinical trials. They're like the bridge between scientists making a discovery and your doctor actually being able to prescribe it.
The key to getting those innovations out of the lab and into the hands of people who need them.
We've got some fascinating guidelines to help us really understand this process.
Rule books, basically.
Exactly. We're looking at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, the FDA,
Of course.
and also the International Council for Harmonization.
The ICH.
Right.
These guidelines, they're basically the instruction manual for, well, anyone involved in making and testing new medical treatments.
Yeah, they might not be bestsellers.
But they are absolutely essential.
The goal today is to give you the key insights without getting too lost in the technical weeds.
It's like your shortcut to understanding this whole critical part of medical progress.
Exactly. And when we talk about these guidelines, we're talking about safety, effectiveness, ethics.
All baked right into the core of how we get new medical innovations.
Okay, so you've got the FDA and the ICH, the heavy hitters in this world. The FDA, they make sure anything you use for medical reasons in the U.S. is safe and it works. I mean, we're talking everything.
Everything.
From prescription drugs to, like, Band-Aids for your kids.
Right.
And the ICH.
They take a more global view, trying to harmonize how we approach pharmaceuticals across the major regions. So the US, Europe, Japan, they're all on the same page.
Makes sense. So instead of a company having to reinvent the wheel for every country.
Exactly. If they meet ICH standards, it's a smoother process to get approval in multiple places, saves time and resources, but as we'll see, it isn't always a perfect system.
Now, something I always found interesting about clinical trials is how they happen in phases.
Oh, absolutely.
It's almost like building a skyscraper.
That's a great analogy.
You got to have a strong foundation before you can even think about the roof.
You can't build from the top down. These phases always go in a specific order, and each one has its own purpose and scale.
Right. So first up, phase 1. This one's all about safety and dosage.
Right, how much of the drug is safe.
These are small trials, right?
Yeah, just a few dozen volunteers, usually healthy people. And the goal is to see what happens when the drug enters the human body. Any immediate side effects, that kind of thing.
So it's like a first glimpse of how humans react.
Precisely.
Okay, then what about phase 2?
Phase 2, the trials get a bit bigger.
More people.
Yeah, 100, maybe a few hundred. And this time, it's people who actually have the condition the drug is meant to treat.
Makes sense.
Now we're seeing if it actually works, if it's effective, but still keeping a close eye on safety, of course.
So from, is it safe for healthy people to, does it actually help with the problem?
Exactly.
And then comes the big one, phase 3.
This is where things get serious. Large-scale studies, often with hundreds or even thousands of participants, and not just in one place. We're talking multiple locations. Right.
This
This is to confirm what we saw in phase 2, make sure it's really effective,
Right.
but also to monitor for side effects in a much bigger and more diverse group, and to compare the new treatment to the standard treatments or a placebo.
A lot is happening in phase 3.
It's a crucial stage.
And even after all that, if everything goes well and the drug or device is approved, there's still phase 4, right?
That's right, post-marketing surveillance. Now we're monitoring it in the real world.
Makes sense.
It's being used by a much wider range of patients, different health conditions, lifestyles, and we need to see if anything pops up long-term.
Hmm.
Side effects that maybe didn't show up in those earlier controlled trials.
So even after approval, the monitoring continues.
Safety is a continuous process.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember, every single one of these phases, they have to stick to incredibly strict guidelines.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't some kind of free-for-all experiment.
No one...
There are very clear rules in place to make sure everything is ethical and the data we're getting is reliable.
Okay, let's get into those rules. You mentioned the FDA earlier.
Right.
Our source talks about Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, the CFR, as the basis for how the FDA regulates clinical trials.
It's like their big rule book.
Okay, so what all does Title 21 actually cover?
Think of it as the U.S. government laying out the FDA's authority. It covers pretty much everything to do with food, drugs, cosmetics, and medical devices. And within that massive document, specific parts of it directly address how clinical trials should be run.
Sounds comprehensive.
And it all boils down to two main principles. First, the trial itself has to be top-notch. The science has to be sound, the data has to be reliable. And second, we have to protect the people who volunteer for these studies. Their safety is paramount.
Makes sense.
It's about the integrity of the science and the well-being of the people.
Now, one of the very first steps before a new drug can even be tested in humans is this thing called the IND.
The Investigational New Drug application.
Right. What's the deal with that?
It's basically a formal request to the FDA. The company developing the new drug is essentially asking for permission to start testing it in people.
So before they can even try it on one person.
They have to submit this huge application with a ton of information. The FDA needs to see everything that's been done up to that point.
Wow, so what kind of information are we talking about?
Well, first off, there are the clinical trial protocols. Think of it like the blueprints for the study. It outlines every detail, what questions the trial is trying to answer, how it will be conducted, the specific procedures they'll use. Everything has to be laid out clearly.
Like a really detailed plan.
Exactly. You can't start building a house without a solid plan. It's the same with a clinical trial. You have to know exactly what you're doing before you start.
That makes sense. What else goes into this IND?
Next, you need all the preclinical research data. This is all the results from the lab studies, any animal testing that's been done.
So showing the groundwork.
Exactly. It's the evidence suggesting that the drug might actually be safe and effective in humans, justification for moving to human trials.
Okay, what about how the drug is actually made? Does the FDA care about that?
Absolutely. They need to know everything about the manufacturing process.
Yeah.
What ingredients are used, how it's produced, what quality control measures are in place.
They want to make sure each batch is
Consistent.
right.
Pure. The same high standard every time.
And what about the people running these trials?
Right. The IND needs to include information about the clinical investigators. These are the doctors, the researchers who are going to be directly overseeing the study at each site.
So their qualifications.
Experience. It's all taken into consideration by the FDA.
And finally, there are compliance statements.
Right. The sponsor is basically formally promising that they'll run the trial according to GCP, good clinical practice, and all other relevant regulations.
So it's really a complete package.
Very thorough.
And to be clear, the FDA have to actually approve this IND before any human testing can happen, right?
Absolutely. It's the green light. Once the FDA has reviewed everything and is confident that it's safe to proceed, then, and only then, can the sponsor actually start those clinical trials.
Okay, you mentioned GCP, good clinical practice, a couple of times now.
Yes.
Our source says this is an international ethical and scientific standard.
Ah.
Can you break down the main parts of GCP for us?
GCP is fundamental. It's really about making sure that clinical trials are done right, not just scientifically, but ethically too. We need good data, but we also need to protect the people who volunteer for these studies.
Right.
There are many important parts of GCP, but 3 really stand out. First, informed consent.
Informed consent. We hear that a lot in medicine. What does it mean when someone's participating in a trial?
It means they have to understand exactly what they're signing up for. The researchers need to explain everything. The potential risks, the potential benefits, all the procedures involved, and their rights as a participant. They have the right to leave the trial at any time, no questions asked.
So they're not pressured.
Exactly. They need all the information to make a truly informed decision about whether they want to participate or not.
It's about empowering them.
Absolutely.
Okay, what's the second part of GCT?
Second, we have the Institutional Review Board, or IRB. This is an independent committee often made up of doctors, scientists, ethicists, even community members.
Oh, so it's a diverse group.
They review and approve the trial protocol before anything can start. They make sure it's ethically sound and that the participants are protected. And they don't just approve it and disappear. They provide oversight throughout the entire trial.
So they're keeping an eye on things.
Exactly. They're like a dedicated ethics committee, making sure everything is done right.
Okay, and the third key element of GCP?
That's the responsibilities of the clinical investigators themselves, the doctors and researchers running the trial at each site. They have to stick to that detailed protocol, report any problems immediately, and ensure all the data they collect is accurate and complete. This is crucial not only for the regulations, but also for the safety of the participants.
It's a huge responsibility.
It is.
Now, we've been talking about drugs, but the FDA also has regulations for biologics and medical devices.
Yes.
Are those very different?
The big ideas are the same, safety and effectiveness. But the specifics, how things are regulated, those can be a bit different. For drugs and biologics, it's all about the Investigational New Drug application, the IND. under Title 21 CFR Part 312.
We talked about that.
Right. This covers everything from the lab research to the clinical trials and GCP.
And medical devices.
For medical devices, it's a different part of Title 21 CFR, Part 812. This is where you get an Investigational Device Exemption, or IDE. This allows a device to be used in trials before it gets full approval from the FDA. The level of scrutiny depends on the device itself.
Okay.
A simple bandage will have less oversight than, say, a complex implantable device. The FDA takes a risk-based approach.
Right, so the level of risk determines
How strict the requirements are.
but the FDA's main focus is always
Safety and effectiveness. They have to be sure that any medical product that goes out to the public is safe to use and does what it's supposed to do.
Okay, let's talk about the ICH guidelines.
Sure.
Our source says they represent the highest international standard for clinical trials. How do they work alongside the FDA?
The ICH is trying to make things consistent globally. They want to harmonize regulations for pharmaceuticals so it's easier for companies to get their products approved in multiple countries.
It's talked about that a bit earlier.
Right. And one of their most important guidelines is ICH E6 R2, which is all about good clinical practice. It's pretty much the international gold standard for how these trials should be run.
So FDA is more U.S. focused.
Yes.
And ICH is looking at the bigger picture.
Trying to bring everyone together on the best way to do things.
So what are some of the key points in ICH E6 R2?
A lot of it overlaps with what we talked about with the FDA and GCP.
Makes sense.
Big emphasis on ethics and making sure the trials are scientifically sound.
Right.
They stress having clear, well-documented study designs. That trial protocol needs to be rock solid to make sure the results are reliable and that everyone is following the rules.
Makes sense. And, like we discussed with the FDA, informed consent is still a huge part of this.
Absolutely. You have to make sure people understand exactly what they're getting into. Minimizing risks, being ethical, that's all paramount.
And ICH E6 R2 also goes into detail about the roles of the investigators and the sponsors.
Right. The investigators are responsible for the safety of the people participating in the trial and for the accuracy of the data. The sponsors are responsible for overall management and making sure they're following all the regulations.
So everyone has their part to play.
It's a team effort.
And of course, having reliable data is absolutely essential.
Couldn't agree more. The ICH guidelines are very clear about that. You have to keep accurate, complete records throughout the whole process. This is so important for audits and for when regulators evaluate the data.
If the data is no good,
the whole trial is compromised.
Exactly. Now, our source also mentions two other ICH guidelines, ICH E8, which is about general considerations for trials, and ICH E9, which focuses on the statistics involved.
Right.
What are the main things to know about those?
ICH E8 really focuses on making sure trials are not only ethical and scientific, but also relevant on a global scale. They push for something called risk-based strategies.
Risk-based strategies.
It's about being flexible and adaptive, focusing on reducing risks, maintaining good data, and keeping people safe, all while being efficient. Kind of like airport security. They don't check every single bag in the exact same way. They focus on the bags that seem more risky, makes the whole process faster without sacrificing safety.
I like that analogy.
Right. It's a more modern, more efficient way of thinking about things.
Definitely.
ICH E8 also emphasizes having diverse groups of people in clinical trials, different ages, genders, ethnicities.
Right.
This helps make sure the findings are relevant to the whole population.
Everyone who might eventually use the treatment.
Exactly. They also support newer trial designs, things like adaptive trials, decentralized trials, and trials that use real-world evidence. This is all about making research more efficient and getting treatments to people faster.
So a lot of focus on progress.
Yeah, finding better, smarter ways to do things.
Okay. And what about ICH E9, the one about statistics?
That's all about making sure the results of the trials are valid and reliable. It covers things like randomization and blinding, which are methods to reduce bias.
So that the results aren't skewed.
Exactly. They also talk about calculating the right sample size and using the correct data analysis techniques.
All about making sure the data is solid.
So we can trust the conclusions.
Now, our source mentioned some differences between the FDA and the ICH. What are the key takeaways there?
The biggest difference is really just their scope. The FDA is focused on the United States,
Right.
while the ICH is international, trying to create standards everyone can use. The FDA operates under Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations with specific parts like Part 50 for protecting human subjects, Part 56 for institutional review boards, Part 312 for investigational new drug applications, and Part 812 for investigational device exemptions. The ICH, on the other hand, focuses on guidelines like E6 for good clinical practice, E8 for general considerations, and E9 for statistics.
So one is country-specific, the other is global. Makes sense.
Right.
Now, with all these complex regulations, keeping up with everything can't be easy.
It's definitely challenging.
What are some of the big challenges organizations face when it comes to compliance during clinical trials?
Well, one big one is just the variation in regulations internationally. Even though the ICH is trying to harmonize things, every country still has its own rules and interpretations.
So it's not perfectly uniform.
Right. This makes running multinational trials really complex because you have to juggle different protocols, reporting standards, and approval processes.
I can imagine.
And then you have data efficiency and privacy. With more and more trials using electronic health records and digital data capture, keeping that data safe and accurate is critical. But you also have to comply with privacy laws like HIPAA in the US and GDPR in Europe.
Balancing data integrity with,
Privacy.
right? It's a lot to handle.
It is.
And what's the third big challenge?
Technology. Technology is constantly evolving, and that creates challenges for regulation. We've got electronic trial management systems, AI being used for data analysis, and the rise of decentralized trials where people participate remotely.
Right.
All of this needs to be properly regulated, and that means constantly updating guidelines and figuring out how to address new risks. For example, how do you monitor patients remotely? How do you make sure digital informed consent is valid and secure? How do you oversee AI algorithms that are making clinical decisions?
Wow, yeah. That's a lot of new ground to cover.
It's a fast-moving landscape.
So organizations need to not only understand the current regulations, but also be ready for whatever comes next.
Exactly. You have to be adaptable.
Okay, so given all these challenges, what are some things organizations can do to make sure their data is good, that they're following the rules, and that their trials are efficient?
There are several strategies. One that's becoming more popular is using electronic trial master files, or ETMFs.
ETMFs.
These are systems that let you manage all your trial documents electronically, in real time. It makes it so much easier to keep things organized, to be ready for audits, and it reduces errors compared to using paper.
Those like moving from a filing cabinet to,
The cloud.
right, much more efficient.
Exactly. Another thing is ongoing training for investigators and all staff. Everyone needs to be up to date on GCP, ethical standards, and any new regulations. This helps minimize mistakes and ensures everyone is doing things the right way.
Keeping everyone on the same page.
Precisely. And finally, there's risk-based monitoring, or RBM. This is using data and analytics to identify potential compliance risks early on.
So you're not waiting for problems to happen.
Exactly. You're being proactive and addressing things before they become big issues. This leads to better quality trials and better outcomes.
Okay, let's look ahead. What are some of the big trends shaping the future of clinical trials? Our source talks about decentralized clinical trials, or DCTs. This seems like a big change in how trials are done.
DCTs are definitely a game changer. They use technology so people can participate in trials from home or from local healthcare settings. They don't have to constantly go to a big research center.
Makes it more convenient.
Much more. And the FDA even put out guidance on DCTs in 2023, laying out how to do them the right way.
So they're supportive of this approach.
Yes. They're focusing on things like digital-informed consent, so people can give consent remotely using secure platforms, and remote monitoring, so researchers can track patient progress and data without seeing them in person.
And telemedicine plays a role, right?
Absolutely. Virtual visits with doctors and the use of wearable devices are becoming more common.
It's all about making trials more accessible.
And AI is also playing a role. We're seeing AI tools used for things like recruitment, data analysis, and risk assessment in DCTs.
So it's bringing the trial to the patient rather than the other way around?
Exact.
That could really open things up for a lot of people.
It has the potential to be much more inclusive.
Okay, another big trend is AI in clinical research more broadly.
Right. AI is making a big impact. It's making research faster, cheaper, and more accurate. For example, AI can analyze huge amounts of data to find the best candidates for trials.
We talked about that a bit.
Right. This helps speed up recruitment and reduces the chance of people dropping out of the trial. It can also improve data collection and risk assessment.
Finding errors early on.
And it can even help predict which trials are more likely to be successful.
Wow, so AI can help us design better trials?
Yes, and make smarter decisions earlier in the process.
That's incredible.
It's pretty amazing how AI is changing things.
Finally, our source mentions personalized medicine and adaptive trial designs.
Yes, personalized medicine is about moving away from a one-size-fits-all approach. It's about tailoring treatments to each individual person, their genes, their specific condition.
So it's more targeted.
Exactly. And the FDA is encouraging this with their real-world evidence framework. They want to use real-world data, including genetic information, to develop these more personalized treatments.
Makes sense. And what about adaptive trial designs?
These are trials that are designed to be flexible. Researchers can make changes to the trial protocol as it goes along based on the data they're seeing.
So they're not locked into one plan.
Right. They can adjust the dosage, change which patients they're studying, even change the endpoints of the study.
All in real time.
Yes, this makes drug development faster, cheaper, and leads to better outcomes because you can fine-tune the treatment as you go.
It sounds like all these trends are about making trials more efficient and more focused on the needs of individual patients.
That's exactly it. And the regulations are evolving to keep up with all these innovations.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating look at clinical trials,
It's a complex world.
but so important. We've learned about the FDA and the ICH, the guidelines they provide, the phases of clinical trials, the importance of ethics,
Informed consent, IRBs.
the challenges of staying compliant in a global landscape, and some of the exciting trends shaping the future of this field.
Like DCTs and AI.
It's clear that these guidelines and the people who enforce them play a vital role in ensuring that new treatments are safe and effective.
And that the people who volunteer for these trials are protected.
Absolutely. It makes you think about how the whole concept of a clinical trial might change in the future.
Right. What will trials look like in 10 years, 20 years? It's an exciting time for medical research.
It really is. But as we move forward, it's important to keep that balance.